After traveling for around 10,000 kilometers, the aircraft has finally entered the South Pacific region. As a part of China's ongoing efforts to help alleviate the disaster, this new batch of emergency supplies will soon arrive at the archipelago.
A maiden flight for the Chinese Air Force to Tonga in the South Pacific. The heavy-lift Yun-20 aircraft, which took off from the southern Chinese city of Guangzhou, brought in 33 tons of relief supplies, like food, water, tents, and protective equipment. They received a big welcome at the airport by dozens of people,
doing the assessment
led by Tongan Prime Minister Celsi Sovaleni.
The supplies in here by these huge planes here actually will cover like the temporary shelters and the temporary beds and so forth. So I think what we're getting right now covers our immediate needs. But then we will need to start talking about the recovery phase where we're looking at the livelihood of the people.
Following strict COVID-19 prevention protocols, aid workers unloaded the tons of shipment with minimal contact. All the goods have been disinfected and will be isolated for 3 days until it's distributed to Tongans.
现在的这个恢复情况怎么样？能简单的谈一下吗？谢谢。
还是相对比较滞后。
Chinese ambassador to Tonga, Cao Xiaolin, also spoke exclusively with CGTN. He said China will continue to support Tonga in its reconstruction.
These supplies express the Chinese government's sincere wishes for recovery in Tonga. We are witnessing and writing history. It's worth doing this now, no matter how difficult it is.
On January 15th, an underwater volcano erupted and triggered a tsunami, resulting in 3 deaths. The calamity severed Tonga's only undersea cable, linking it with the outside world, and impacted the livelihoods of more than 80% of the country's over 100,000 population.
It's been around 2 weeks since a volcanic eruption and tsunami devastated Tonga. Some of the surrounding areas are still covered with ash and debris. As the cleanup work continues, experts warn of potential health hazards.
The island nation remains in a state of emergency until February 13th. Officials say damage to property and the long-term effects will be felt for years. China has provided disaster relief assistance to Tonga through multiple channels. But for this mission, it's the very first batch of supplies sent directly from China. We Are One Under the Same Sun, designed by China Media Group, shows the solidarity between the two nations.
I'm very honored to be a part of this international humanitarian aid mission. It shows China's strong will to help Tonga people alleviate the disaster and quickly recover from it. I'm very glad that I've done my part to make their life less difficult.
Now, the aircraft have returned back to China. The country says it will continue to do its best to provide assistance to meet Tonga's relief and reconstruction needs. It will send Navy ships on January 31st, a day ahead of the Chinese New Year, to deliver another batch of aid. Meng Qingsheng, CGTN, Tonga Tapu, Kingdom of Tonga.
Well, this is really fascinating. This ship, just taking a look at what it does, it can carry more than 5,000 metric tons of cable. That may sound like a lot, but when you consider what we're dealing with, it's really not the case. We're talking about a cable that, as you mentioned, it stretches from Tonga to here in Fiji, about 750 to 800 kilometers long. It is extremely long. More importantly, it is the only cable linking Tonga to the rest of the world as far as communications go. And you may remember the day of the volcano and tsunami, communications were basically cut off. They had a blackout for at least 5 days. Even today, more than 2 weeks after that disaster, communications are still an issue, especially internet access. Now, that ship left Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea 10 days ago. It is scheduled to arrive in Tonga today. Engineers on board believe there are probably 2 breaks in that cable, but there are a lot of unknowns, including the concern about any kind of underwater activity that might have caused some debris to collapse on top of that cable. Now, the way they're going to actually figure out exactly where those breaks are in the repair, it's really fascinating. They're going to use a fiber optic cable, and they're going to emit a signal basically through that. And when the signal bounces back to them, They'll measure the amount of time that they took. They'll use that to determine exactly where those breaks are. They'll then remove a section of the cable where the breaks are and replace it with a new one and eventually splice it. The amazing part about this, all of this takes place well under the surface of the ocean. They'll use some robotic equipment as well. If all goes well, they do expect to have communications back restored, that cable back restored, in about 2 weeks.